Good morning and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining INTERTEK for the Verify Face Mask Compliance and Instill Customer Confidence with the INTERTEK Mask Label. My name is Shelley. I'm the Marketing Director of Global Softlines and Hardlines. Before we begin today's presentation, I would like to go over some housekeeping items. Please keep in mind that due to the high number of attendees, all callers aside from the presenters have their lines automatically muted. If you have any questions during the webinar, please type them into the question pane on your control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. We will address the questions following the presentation. Today's webinar is being recorded, and a PDF of the slides presented and a link to the webinar recording will be emailed to each attendee after the webinar. We are happy to have Mike Ragshaw, Head of Technical, Global Softlines, who has over 20 years of experience in the industry to present for us today. And now I'd like to pass it over to Mike to begin.
Thanks, Shelley. And I would also like to welcome all attendees to this webinar today, which covers the INTERTEK Mask Labelling Program. This is a program which has been developed as a tool which can help the visibility and traceability of products which have been tested by INTERTEK. There are stringent requirements for masks, such as medical masks and respirators, and compliance checking for these products is performed by a different range of enforcement authorities around the globe. However, the COVID-19 pandemic has led to quite an unprecedented boom in the demand for different types of masks. And the result of that is that there's been a corresponding increase in people passing off to their customers either fake or incomplete reports. And this can be a way of placing substandard, low quality, or even counterfeit masks onto the marketplace. The result of this, and also the media attention around it, means that consumers are not quite sure if the masks that they buy have been tested to comply with relevant regulatory standards, or whether the claims on the packaging can be trusted. It can be expected that going forward, the customers will now want to ensure that the masks which they purchase have indeed been tested and tested correctly. In response to this, we would like to introduce the INTERTEK Mask Labelling Program, which is intended to provide more traceability to the testing of these products. However, before we look at the labelling program, I would like to start by looking at the different types of masks and the various classifications, particularly in respect of the USA and Europe. This will include a brief introduction to the key performance tests and the different types of masks which are available. And we will also consider some of the formal certification requirements. On this slide, we can see the different types of masks which are often observed on the market. The masks which we see can offer different types of functionality, and the definition of the mask depends on the functionality which is expected from it. The type of mask we will discuss today are medical masks and particulate respirators. So I'll firstly begin by introducing the products and then look at the requirements in a little bit more detail. A medical mask is a type of mask which covers the mouth and the nose, and it provides a barrier to minimise the direct transmission of infective agents. The masks are usually not rigid and made of several different material layers. It's intended to be used to prevent droplets and other fluids passing from the wearer to other people in their vicinity. A non-medical mask may be used in all situations, but should not be used in a surgical environment where a more sterile product is needed. The sterile surgical mask is also a medical face mask, which covers the mouth and nose in a similar way. And then we have particulate respirators or filtering face pieces. This is a half mask which covers the nose, the mouth and the chin. In some cases, these masks may have inhalation or exhalation valves, and the idea is that they should have good breathability with a design that doesn't collapse against the mouth. And the type of designs that we see frequently are duckbill and cup shape. This next slide shows some of the key performance tests which are used to evaluate mask performance. The first test that we will look at is the bacterial filtration efficiency, or BFE test. This is a test which is performed on materials and devices which are designed to provide a resistance against bacterial agents. And what the test does, it provides a measure of the resistance of the material to penetration by bacteria. And the principle is that a bacterial culture is sprayed onto the face mask, and any material which passes through the mask is collected. Samples are then taken to determine the bacterial content which has been able to penetrate through the material or the mask. The results are reported as a percentage efficiency rating, and the higher the number, the better the barrier efficiency. And there are two key methods, ASTM F2101 and EN 14683 Annex B, and these methods are comparable. The next test is fluid resistance testing. This can also be known as blood penetration or splash resistance test. And the object of this test is to determine the resistance of the mask to liquid splashes, such as blood and other bodily fluids. During the test, a high velocity sample of synthetic blood is effectively fired at the mask, and this determines the pressure at which it will penetrate the mask. And it is the pressure then which is reported as the final test result. We'll now look at particle filtration efficiency testing, PFE, and particle penetration tests. And the purpose of this is to determine if any particulate matter can penetrate the mask. In the medical mask standard, the test ASTM F2299 uses a latex polymer particle aerosol of 1 micron in diameter, and these are impacted against the mask in a controlled airflow chamber. The number of particles which are retained by the mask are counted to provide a measure of filtration efficiency. If we have a particle respirator, the particular filtration efficiency is determined using a liquid sodium chloride aerosol and or a paraffin oil aerosol. The challenge aerosols are fired at the mask using various flow rates, and the level of the penetration of the aerosol is assessed to determine the resistance of the mask. In both particle resistance tests, the results are expressed as a percentage, and the higher the number, the better the performance. What we often see is that the higher the PFE, or particle resistance performance, the more difficult it can be for air to pass through the material comfortably. This means that the breathability test, or differential pressure testing, is key. And this is a test which assesses how easy it is for a wearer to breathe comfortably. And the test determines the resistance of the face mask to airflow. A lower breathing resistance indicates a better level of comfort for the user. If you recall, medical masks can be classified into two categories: non-sterile and sterile. The non-sterile mask is intended to be used by a patient or other user to prevent transmission, and these are defined as medical devices. In Europe, they're classed as Class 1 medical devices, and we can see in the table that there are different applicable standards for these non-sterile products. In the EU, it's 14683. In the US, it's ASTM F2100. China has YYT 0969 or GB 19083. And the standards are formal standards which should be followed to ensure compliance. Sterile masks should be tested to the same standard, but there's a minimum performance level requirements, and for Europe, that should be type 2 or type 2R, and in the US, it should be above level 1. And the lower table illustrates some of the key differences between the performance levels of EN 14683 and ASTM 2100. And a major difference is that the US standard has a particulate filtration efficiency requirement, where EN 14683 does not. If we now move on to particulate respirators, or filtering face pieces, the purpose of this mask is to protect the user by filtering out particles from the surrounding environment. This means that the mask has a personal protective function and therefore is classed as PPE. The standards which apply are EN 149 for Europe. In the US, it is 42 CFR 84. In China, GB 2626. And in Australia, AN NZS 1716. In the EU, this type of device is considered to be a Class 3 PPE respiratory protective device. In this slide, we can see different examples of the respirator type. We see typical FFP1, FFP2, and FFP3 devices. And the table summarizes some of the key differences between the classes based on the European and US classifications. An FFP1 device offers the lowest level of protection and is intended to protect against low levels of dust and particles in activities such as drilling and sanding. An FFP2 or N95 products have similar levels of performance, but there are slight differences in that they have filtration efficiency requirements of 94 and 95 respectively. And this is the minimum level of device which should be used to protect healthcare workers. And FFP3 or N99 masks have the maximum level of protection, and they should have a minimum filtration efficiency of 99%. And in this next slide, I would like to introduce an overview of the extensive INTERTEK capability in mask testing and certification. We now have several locations around the globe which can offer mask testing to INTERTEK clients. In China, we have INTERTEK labs in Guangzhou, Shanghai, which can offer medical mask testing. And this can be to EU or US standards. We also have medical mask testing capabilities in India, Singapore, Guatemala, and in Cortland in the USA. Testing can also be provided through a partnership arrangement in Bangladesh. If we consider respirators or N95 type masks, this testing can be carried out in Guangzhou, Shanghai, India, and in the US at Cortland. And for CE marking and certification, we have our Italy PPE notified body in the process of obtaining approval for respirators. And we also have a medical devices notified body located in Switzerland, which can offer certification for mask and respirator production processes. In the next part of the presentation, we will cover some of the formal certification and approval processes for masks and respirators. We'll cover CE marking for the European market and also consider the route for FDA approvals. This slide shows the certification routes for the masks in Europe. Medical masks are considered to be within the scope of the Medical Devices Directive, which is legislation which will be replaced by the Medical Devices Regulation. Masks, for medical purposes, are first of all non-invasive. They do not touch a patient during a surgical procedure and are only in contact with the skin. So this makes them a relatively low risk medical device, and they're considered to be a class 1 medical device. If the mask is a sterile one, it is required to have notified body approval for the sterile aspects of the production facility, and this will involve an auditing of the production and quality management system. If we have a respirator, then these are regulated under the personal protective equipment regulations. And under that regulation, they are considered to be class 3 PPE devices, which are intended to provide respiratory protection. Class 3 devices should be assessed and be certified by a notified body which is approved for the certification of this type of respiratory device. So what are the steps which would be necessary to CE mark a medical mask? We've seen on the previous slide that they come under the legal framework of the Medical Devices Directive or the Medical Devices Regulation and are classed as a Category 1 medical device. This means that any testing program should be based on the harmonised standard EN 14683. A technical file should be prepared to cover the essential requirements of the legislation. And a technical file is something which is similar to a product specification, but includes aspects to assess the risk management process. And the testing process and test reports should be included as part of that technical file. And it should include all relevant design, material, labels, packaging, and other relevant information in the technical file. And it could include things such as the bill of materials to show a consistency in production and performance, design drawings, and this may include details of the filtration medium, for example, label files, and the technical file should contain details of the labeling which should be applied to the product, packaging files, which includes the packaging specification to include and ensure the integrity of the product, details of the applied standards, which would usually be EN 14683, the test reports for the testing program, any QC reports, which would be used for control during production, and any risk assessment which has been carried out. And a CE mark can be applied and does not require the involvement of a notified body to certify unless the face mask is a sterile device. And if it is a sterile device, a notified body certification should be included from a medical devices notified body. The importer should hold the technical file, or they may have an authorised representative located in Europe to hold the technical documentation. And they can prepare a declaration of conformity, which includes the name of the importer authorised representative. And finally, a medical device should be registered with the appropriate medical body for approval to be used. And the principle is the same if we have a respiratory device, but there are some differences in the process. The device offers protection to the wearer and is PPE, and the Category 3 PPE falls under the legal framework of the Personal Protective Equipment regulations. And because it is Category 3, it should be certified by a third-party approved notified body. The testing program should be based on the harmonised standard EN 149, and the technical file should be prepared to cover the essential requirements of the legislation. The technical file should be submitted to the notified body as part of the certification procedure. The content of the technical file should again include information such as the bill of materials, design drawings, label files, packaging files, test reports, and quality management system and relevant quality control reports. The importer should hold the technical file, or again, they may have an authorised representative to hold the documentation. And then a declaration of conformity can be prepared, which includes the name of the importer or relevant authorised representative. We can now move on to the approval of a medical mask in the US, and this is regulated by the Food and Drug Administration, or FDA. And there are some key steps to obtaining FDA approval, and the slide shows the general process which is required. The first step is to identify the classification of the product. And the FDA identified 3 key classes of products. A submission, known as a 510K, is a pre-market submission which is made to the FDA. And the purpose of this is to demonstrate that the device is as safe and effective as other similar products which are already on the market. And the device should be compared to one or other devices which are there, and there should be evidence to substantiate that it is equivalent to other products on the market. A submission may be made by a US-based manufacturer or any entity who develops the specification if they have that device manufactured under another contract by another firm or entity. And foreign manufacturers and exporters may use a US representative to introduce the device into the US. If the product is successfully approved, the device is listed on the FDA website and registered. And from the classes, a face mask and respirators are class 2 medical devices. And this means that they would usually require pre-market approval. A surgical N95 respirator or N95 filtering face piece respirator is not exempt from this process if it is intended to prevent specific diseases or infections. And medical devices themselves are covered under the regulation 21 CFR 800 through to 1299. And the key parts of the regulation which are required are covered in this slide here. So we have 21 CFR 8101, which covers labelling, 21 CFR 803, which covers medical device reporting, 21 CFR 806, which covers processes for the reporting of corrections and removals, 21 CFR 807, which gives details of the registration and device listing for manufacturers and importers, 21 CFR 1820, which covers requirements for quality systems, 21 CFR 820 Part 30, which has requirements for design controls, 21 CFR 821, which has tracking requirements, and 21 CFR 830, which has a requirement for unique device identification. Most products which are covered under this legislation require that the manufacturing processes meet that regulation of 21 CFR 1820. This regulation is very similar to the international standard ISO 13483, which is the certification standard for medical devices quality systems, and it is expected that eventually the FDA will harmonise the regulation with this standard. The sections of the standard and the regulation are typical of quality management system in that the requirements are set for production control, design control, and verification, and procedures should be set out to identify any non-conforming products. The key points to highlight on this slide are the quality system, because there should be controls in the production process to ensure that production is monitored and the product is consistent and compliant. The design control, because the design should be documented, and this may include design drawings and may include details of the filtration medium, for example, and design verification, and could include details of the testing program, such as ASTM F2100 for medical masks. The FDA provides a general recommendation for performance testing needed to support surgical masks, but it does not specifically discuss the sampling plan which should be used. However, the FDA does recognise the sampling plan which included in ASTM F2100, which recommends a 4% AQL. And this is recommended to establish performance requirements for medical masks. Now that we've discussed testing and approval routes for medical products, we'd now like to introduce the INTERTEK Mass Labelling Program. And this is a program to enhance the traceability and visibility of testing, which is performed at INTERTEK Centres of Excellence around the globe. To help promote regulatory compliance and improve traceability of masks in the market, we have developed this mass labelling program. This is a voluntary program which offers our customers a mark which will allow them to verify that their masks have been tested to be compliant with international or national standards. It focuses on providing traceability of testing. It is a tool to help customers communicate and differentiate their masks from others on the market which may not have been tested. But it should be noted that the label itself does not indicate that a CE certificate or FDA registration has been obtained. This program will be offered to customers whose masks have been tested at the INTERTEK PPE Centres of Excellence around the globe and been found to meet the requirements of the international or national standard which has been tested to. An example of these standards would be ASTM F2100 or EN 14683. Satisfactory testing to these standards would make the applicant eligible to apply for the mass label program, and the label would be valid for 1 year from the date of report, and the scheme is free of charge for our customers. It is designed to complement the product tested and will be an added value service to the mass testing business. And if we take a closer look at the details of the mass label, there are some points which I would like to highlight. And the first point that we can see on the mask icon, which is on the left-hand side. And the mask icon will be used to indicate the mask type. And the label can be for either a medical mask or a respirator type mask. In this case, we can see the medical mask icon, and the icon is intended to illustrate the typical folded construction which we often see for this type of mask. When we have a respirator icon, it will show the raised duckbill service which often we can see. The next part I would like to highlight is that the label indicates the standard to which the mask has been tested to. In this example, we can see that it is the EN 14683 standard which has been tested, and that the mask is type 2R. This means that the mask has been tested to comply with EN 14683 standard and has attained the minimum requirements set forth in the requirements for the type 2R mask. And the third part I would like to highlight is the unique QR code. And this points to the related mask performance and information which will be detailed on the report. And successful applicants will get their unique label mask and artwork format to be used for their promotional use. So how does it work? By scanning the QR code on the mask label, or if the mask label is placed on a public website, such as a linked image, it can direct to a link holding the test report details. It'll bring visitors to the mask report with a cover page which shows the key performance metrics. It will also allow the detailed report to be viewed so that the individual results can be seen. So the mask label is a great tool to showcase the testing which has been carried out on your mask. So how is it possible to obtain the label? And this can be done in just 3 easy steps. The first is to conduct the testing at one of our INTERTEK labs, and the test submission should indicate which international standard or international standards which the mask should be tested to. And this should then be submitted to one of our INTERTEK PPE labs. The next step is to fill in an application form for the mask labelling program. And this can be completed together with the mask testing application form. And finally, if the products comply with international standards, then the coordinator for the scheme will submit the report, a relevant testing report and form, so that labels can be issued to the applicant and be applied to the product. So as we draw today's webinar to a close, I'd like to highlight some of the key features of the mask labelling program. A program which is a way for INTERTEK customers to demonstrate that their product has been tested by a recognised accredited laboratory. But to summarise the benefits of the program, it would include the following. Firstly, it's a trusted tool to allow you to showcase that the products have been tested for relevant regulatory compliance. It'll help differentiate masks from other products on the market by providing verifiable information with instant access with just the scan of a QR code. It'll help to provide traceability for mass products, and if production is done in batches, there can be different mass labels for the different production batch units. And the information will also be held in an INTERTEK PPE directory, which will be used to showcase products which have been tested and found to be compliant. And just to highlight, the programme will be developed and be extended to include barrier face coverings or community masks. It will follow similar principles to the regulatory standards, but will cover published standards such as CWA 17553, which has been issued by SEN in Europe, ASTM F3502 for the US, and also the AATCC M14. The final details of this extension to the INTERTEK mass labelling programme will be communicated soon within the coming weeks. So finally, I would like to thank you for your time today, and I hope that the information has been helpful and useful, and we will now open up the webinar for any questions which you may have on the programme. Thank you.